I'm saying stuff that probably they were saying in 1970s and teaching classes, and then I'm saying it like it's new and it's a new thing, but it's just sort of a regression back to what you should have been doing in the first place, but attribution allowed people to get fancy and not put in the effort.
Hello. How's it going, everyone? So we're back again with Nathan. We've been seeing a lot of comments in the section talking about how you guys love the Blue Sense people. So we're back again with more brain rotting and mind numbing conversations that are hard to understand, but somehow people follow them.
Somehow.
So I think today we're going to talk about incremental sort of testing and the new way to look at, versus third-party attribution tools. How do you actually find out what's working in your business, right? What's driving the revenue, what's driving new customers, and the age-old saying of like, what's the true first click, right? Because, Google took away first click, wasn't even accurate before. And now it's just one of those things people are like, well, what do we do? What's going on data? And like, how does that relate to actual sales and performance max, and how that, can be a potentially good thing or a bad thing depending on your incrementality tests. So, Nathan, what is your, initial opinion when it comes to incrementality tests and what you've seen be sort of a good starting point for a lot of agencies or, clients?
Yeah, I think firstly, incrementality testing, it's probably a word that'll turn into a buzzword in like 6 months or 12 months because it's so needed, because in-platform doesn't really tell you a whole lot. It's good for giving you some like triangulation as to what's going on, but you can't really figure it out unless you're baselining off back-end revenue or back-end new customer revenue or whatever it might be. The first thing that I normally tell clients anytime I propose, hey, let's do an incrementality test, and so let's bump budgets and see, are we going to see a significant uptick in revenue, and then ideally enough revenue that it turns into profit? And the first suggestion is always we need actually big budget changes. And you have an idea that you're about to go into which actually fixes for this issue. But I always say that we need big budget changes, because if you are going from a $5K budget a month to a $6K budget a month, but you're a $60,000 business, and you have natural swings in top line each month, how do you tell that you added any revenue onto top line, right? Because your revenue looks like 55, 64, 58, 62, 50. So there's this slight variance. You add $1,000 in spend. You can't incrementality test like that, because the incremental uplift on top line doesn't become visible unless you wait 3 to 6 months and then measure a very long time horizon. So that's the first thing with incrementality testing. The second is you have to keep variables relatively constant across the board, which is also really tough. And that's why attribution was a godsend by the marketing gods about 5 years ago, when it actually worked somewhat well, because you didn't have to go back to essentially first principles marketing. But I feel like that's where we're going. We're retracting back to the old days, and now we're saying stuff.
They're coming back.
Yeah. I'm saying stuff that probably they were saying in 1970s and teaching classes, and then I'm saying it like it's new and it's a new thing, but it's just sort of a regression back to what you should have been doing in the first place, but attribution allowed people to get fancy and not put in the effort.
Yeah, no, and I think the one of the key points you brought up too was benchmarking, right? Like, what's your baseline? And so there's, all these little correlations that happen, like you said, naturally, because, think of the stock market, the normal ebb and flow of just companies in general, right? That's just like businesses, right? Like, you have a good sale, bad sale day, and it's all just based on the user pipeline, users on the website. Like, there's just so many factors that come into play there. And as you grow a business further and further, yes, that might not be as like dramatic of a change from day to day, but there still is a significant change, and the budget correlation to that is going to be a big factor. And I would also argue that even dropping budget aggressively in other areas, if you don't want to scale, is another test that you could do as well. That would kind of tell you, okay, is this pulling too much from, repeat customers? Is this hurting my bottom line on like the actual like NCAC on the first time user, AOV, like all these other benchmarks that you have set over longer periods of time? Because the other thing that I think is really important with this is seasonality. And so having, and this is, my initial thought of why I believe companies that have been established tracking these numbers for years have a way better estimation on what their profit is going to be, because, a year of COVID, a year without COVID, like all these different things can sort of change a year's impact. And so the more years you have, the more accurate data you have to kind of go off of to then assume your season, right? So it's like, hey, we're going to go into a season where, we're not going to sell this product in summer because it's a winter product. So then you drop sales. Obviously, that's a very obvious one, but just being aware of those kinds of trends helps too when you benchmark, so you know exactly what that incrementality test is going to do. The other thing that Nathan was mentioning, which was one of the ideas to help solve this, or at least kind of give you more of a clear picture of what is actually happening, is geo-targeting. So if you notice that, like your top performing state is, let's say, like Texas or California or whatever state it is, if you're advertising in the US, what you can do is just run ads in specifically, a state, right? So you're trying a smaller pool, you have their address in Shopify, right? You can see like if this person is actually in that state, and then seeing if that drives up revenue in that state or not. And if that actually increases it, then you have a smaller test pool, so you have more. You can make waves a lot easier in that space versus that of your full business model. So I think that's a really, really important factor. And all of this kind of highlights, what Nathan was saying too, like these old terms that people use all the time back then, which is essentially we're just looking for the halo effect, right? Like we're just looking for what is the cause of the ad to the entire business, right? And there's, all these small things that can happen as well too, right? Like you can see that organic traffic increases, direct decreases, whatever the case may be. And that's going to be all based on just how controlled your variables are or not is going to be how accurate that's going to look, right? Because you can launch a blog and your actual organic traffic is going to go up, right? But so you have to be aware of sort of the full business picture. And I believe that marketing agencies that do the full top of funnel control actually have that insight, because you don't have to worry about, the Facebook team or the Google team making a change when you're like, no, we don't want to change what the business is doing right now because we're seeing if we can find a correlation to that pattern. So yeah, hopefully that kind of, I guess, summed up what you were saying, Nathan, but I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, for sure. The only thing that I would really add is that, and John says this a lot, Solutions 8 says this a lot, which is if you look in platform, it won't necessarily make sense as to where you should put budget because all the attribution goes to the last click. And so incrementality testing gives you the ability and the confidence to be able to allocate budgets to a campaign that has a 1 ROAS. And you're going, oh, that's not a good deal. But if you do proper incrementality testing where you're looking at top line revenue, you should be able to have the confidence to do that test, monitor your top line rev or monitor your new customer revenue, and then see what happens out the other end. An important caveat there is you need to wait quite a while for the consumer journey to actually occur. Someone on average takes 14 days to purchase from you. You need to wait 14 days because if you're just increasing the top of funnel and then you don't see an uptick in revenue and you go, oh, it didn't work. It's like, well, because these people haven't come down the funnel yet. Like give them some time. And so, yeah, structured testing, if you're not doing it, you should be doing it. And the geo idea was fantastic. I'm actually going to start rolling that out in some accounts.
Well, I would say also too, one thing that I've done before is, with clients that don't really have the capabilities of testing for that long, is if I know like the average time from when they're going to like the actual lag time beginning and end. So like if it's like a week, let's say, I'll do a test super aggressively for like 2 to 3 days, like really aggressively, as long as it's like the same targeting. So we're like, let's say on manual or something like that, where it's just black and white. This is where it's going. We don't have to wait for it to warm up into it. I'll then say, okay, we'll do the test, have it for like 3-4 days in there. That's pretty aggressive. Then trim it off and see if there's uptick over that time lag. So if you jump from like you launch it this Monday, it launches for 2 days, 3 days, really aggressively, pause it, look at the results then 7 days from now. So there you capture the timeline before and after. And I think that's a good way that you don't necessarily like, it's not as accurate, but it's a very good way to kind of get a temperature check on like what that actually is doing. So then it builds your confidence of like, okay, I want to make this last for 7 days versus just, that quick little bump up. And that's not to say that you have to increase. You can also decrease and test that as well too. One of the biggest things that I like to do is tell clients that come to Solutions 8 is, if you don't believe me, try it yourself, right? So there'll be like a Performance Max campaign that I see that it's getting a lot of repeat traffic. I'll say, okay, we don't need to increase budget on to prove the point. Just pause half the spend, and then we'll see what happens. Do it for like 3 days, and if you don't see any drop off, during the end of your time lag, then you have your answer right there, kind of thing. So a lot of these tests can be done to solve attribution issues, but it's the confidence level of it is sort of what you can kind of play with based on your tolerance to tests. So if you're, not tolerant to tests at all, then like your confidence level is going to be a lot shorter or a lot lower. Whereas if you're, very open to tests, and your confidence level potential is a lot larger. So that's why I kind of go back into that thought pattern that I had earlier, which was it's really important that if you have one agency that they're obviously communicating with one another internally, or if you have two agencies running your Facebook and your Google, they're also communicating back and forth. And ideally, you'd have the system of you just have both, because then they have a system they already know the incrementality test and they're logging it all. But I think it's really, really important as even just a business owner to be aware of whatever tests are happening. And something as simple as, and this is what I do for all my clients, is having a P&L sheet and then having the actual test logs inside of the P&L sheet. So you can see clear correlations. We can look back years later, it's like, what did we try in 2022 or whatever it is? And then see, okay, during summer, we actually did this test and it got us better revenue. Why did that happen? Or got us more revenue? Why did that happen? And then you say, oh, because we were targeting this theme or this creative or whatever the case may be, this demographic. And maybe that demographic fatigued over that period of time. But now it's been a couple years, we can test that same creative again or that same audience again. And because it gets refilled with a bunch of new people after that time frame. So it's all kind of up to you as to how you view incrementality testing and how the agency views it. But it's definitely, I would say, the number one way to solve the attribution problem. And that also goes to say that when you're benchmarking, make sure that you're benchmarking off of, even if it's flawed attribution, if it's still attribution, that's something. Because if you look at a scenario where, you trust an algorithm, right? So like there's like some third-party tools that will kind of try to piece together all the puzzles for you. It kind of muddies the water, because you don't necessarily know if the algorithm was set up this way during this date range or this way in this other date range. I don't know, Nathan, if you've had some experience with third-party apps in that sense, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, for sure. I was a big fan of third-party apps like 6 months ago, and then I went down the rabbit hole and I said, this probably isn't helpful. It's not really giving us any further information. It's just confusing everyone. The one other thing that I'll say on incrementality is people are probably wondering why are we even using that word? What is incrementality? Where incrementality comes from is that we're trying to measure incremental improvement in profit as we scale. And that's lost by a lot of agencies and particularly a lot of juniors when they come on board, because you'll always provide a blended target, right? Always. It's like, what's your target? Oh, it's a 4 MER or it's a $30 CAC. But that doesn't consider that if you add an incremental 2K in spend, are we still getting an incremental 4 MER? Probably not. And so if you're looking at averages, you can very easily have a junior run your account up to spending 40K a month in ad spend. Yes, your MER is 4, but that last 10K in spend that they tacked on added no revenue. And it just brought your average down. And it looks fine. The average looks fine, but you just cranked your expenses up with nothing at the other end. And so incrementality testing in the way that we've been talking about and recommending it, it's really making sure that you're measuring the difference that occurs in the top, rather than looking at the blended average, because a lot of people are overspending quite a bit, particularly on bottom of funnel. And so this is a really easy way to easily identify overspending and inefficiencies in your account at the moment.
Yeah, I would say, literally every single client I've had come in, there's always an inefficiency when it comes to bottom funnel. Always. I've never had a scenario where that wasn't the case. So it's interesting hearing you say that, because it's definitely true. And it's always one of those debates online where I see people are like, well, the ROAS is good. It's good. It's fine. It's like, yeah, but you just had all this other effects happen and it's just a brand campaign that's pulling in the ROAS. Yeah, it happens all the time. It's crazy. It honestly blows my mind that people aren't up in arms about this. But,
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So I don't know if you have anything else to add, Nathan, but I wanted to talk on one last point, which is earlier in terms of what's a good sign, what's a bad sign, what to kind of look for. And I think you've actually talked this about on your channel as well too, which is looking at user engagement. So when it comes to the early part of the test, right? So you don't want to wait that lag time, or you want to get some sort of signal that gives you confidence that, you know, people are flowing through the funnel at the right rate. And a lot of that's tracked with just general engagement, right? So if you're looking at, you know, how well your ads are performing, so like you said before, like unique click-through rate on, you know, actual link clicks. So like individual users that are new, clicking on the link and then seeing if that holds when you scale. Looking at, like, for example, what Google tracks as click conversions. Yes, that's a signal of something. Seeing if that changes at all. So there's a lot of these little sort of pre-signals, I guess you can say, that give you information on if you believe the test is going to go well or not. But I don't want to harp too much on that, because there are instances where you might be going into a new audience and that new audience might increase or shrink the lag time, and so you might see like worse engagement for a period of time. So that is possible as well too, but it's just a sign to kind of look in and say, okay, what do I think is going to happen? And sort of your threshold of, okay, how much more do I want to risk running this test or, you know, not, kind of thing. And I think a lot of that just comes down to the client and the actual business model itself first too. So I think that's why, you know, like we were saying earlier, geo-targeting or having a smaller test group can be a way to kind of alleviate some of that stress there.
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess we're just going to continue the series. It'll be one of these things where we just go over, I guess, whatever you guys want to talk about, or if we have some ideas that we see in the market that will help you guys out. But yeah, thanks again for coming on, Nathan. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you pretty soon here.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? So we're back again with Nathan, and he's just been, you know, getting blown up by all the comments and like people reaching out to us like, we want to hear more about, like, you know, what's going on with P&Ls, how to understand and demystify everything that CFOs talk about. And so when it comes to marketing, it's not just about running Google ads a certain